Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me pretty much everywhere as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? We're right in the middle of the Summer League right now. I'm enjoying that. Free agency is winding up, and that's mostly what's going on right now.
Winding down. I think you made this observation.
There's not very many players left.
Yeah, we're going to talk the NBA offseason, and we're getting to the bottom of the barrel here. There are two players that we'll discuss, like Carmelo Anthony and maybe a little more Kawhi, even though we've talked a ton. But that's going to be this week's show. We're going to talk this week in NBA offseason and me actually getting an article up. So, Brian, here's a funny note. I actually got, like, Midwestern passively aggressive sassed by Google Analytics. I don't do much with it, but we do have it on the site. And it was like, hey, we don't get a lot of traction, especially during the offseason, but it's like, hey, you have more views on your site Monday than you normally do. Something weird's going on. And it's basically like 2 Mondays in a row I've gotten an article on the site. So like Google Analytics is like, is everything okay? You haven't been putting a lot of content out. You're actually putting content on the site. So anyway, we've got an article I'm going to discuss about NBA parity in the NBA and more free agent tracking. And I'm actually going to let a comment from last week's show. I'm going to give a shout out to Math Says, who commented on last week's show, Brian. We discussed it a little, but I guess I want to revisit the point because I think Math Says is correct. I kind of made a statement that needs more elaboration for how much we say about this guy. So Math Says asked how I could be so flippant about the Dallas Mavericks picking up DeAndre Jordan. Because DeAndre Jordan, we basically thought as a top 5 wins producer in the NBA, I think the last 5 years, that sounds right. I wrote an article a few years back about how he was an MVP candidate. And, I basically said, him going to Dallas, I didn't think was going to move much. The bigger thing I guess I would say is I didn't think he was going to turn them from a bad team to a contender. This is a subject, I love this one that Patrick's brought up, like the Patrick's rung to success. If we ever sell out and do corporate gigs, this will be our sales pitch. The Patrick Minton rungs to success, because he's basically saying the NBA success is like a ladder, and you basically need to climb multiple rungs to go from being a mediocre or bad team to being a superstar team. And you could basically view every superstar as a rung, kind of every 2 or 3 decent players as a rung. And so what I'm saying is, last season, the Dallas Mavericks were a 20-some-odd win squad. They're going to pick up DeAndre Jordan. We think he's a 20 wins producer the last couple seasons, but I think he's older. I think there's some overlap with some good players. So it's like, I think he can maybe get them another 10 to 15 wins. That still leaves them as a 35-win squad. I don't expect Luka Doncic, I think I said that right, to be a difference maker off the bat. So it's like, I can see him helping this squad do better, but when you're that bad, to do much, much better is going to be harder. So that was kind of the point. And actually, one of the things that we kind of talked a little last week that makes me sad is there are a lot of really good players in the NBA that are just wasted on squads. Anthony Davis is one of the most, prolific players in modern NBA, and he has been wasted on the Pelicans, and that franchise is really good at that because Chris Paul was the same way. Chris Paul was one of the most productive rookies in NBA history, and basically it was for nothing. So that's really the point to follow up on Math Says' point. It wasn't that I was saying we didn't think DeAndre Jordan was going to be good next year. I was just saying I didn't think he was going to do enough to basically elevate the Mavericks. However, we've basically been wrong on the Mavericks consistently. They're one of these dark horse teams that we never know what's going to happen. So who knows? The Mavericks might actually be a decent squad next year. Although, as we'll discuss when we talk my article, they may basically just get burned by the fact that they are out west. Let's talk some free agency. There are a few trackers you've got up. Spotrac is pretty good. There are a lot of names to go over. I was getting it wrong, but let's go over. I thought it was LaVine. You're saying it's LaVine. But Zach.
No, I'm saying the opposite. I think it's LaVine.
No, I thought it. Okay, so LaVine. Okay, so Zach LaVine, as I understand it, here's what happened. The Sacramento Kings offered him, I think, 4-year, $78 million contract. He was then matched by the Chicago Bulls. And we have thought at his peak with Minnesota a few years ago, We thought he was a below average player. He was downright awful last season. And another big flag to me is in his first 4 seasons, he's never been above average as a player. He's never hit 2,500 minutes as a player. I just do not understand what people see in this guy. And I'm going to try and get the full details. But, this is an oldie but goodie for Patrick, which is just the fact that you are right, by the way. I went to Basketball Reference, who does have pronunciation. It is LaVine. But there is a classic sunk cost fallacy in the NBA where teams invest a draft pick or teams invest a contract. And what you really need to say to yourself is, well, even though I invested all that in this player, it's really not worth it. And so what ended up happening, by the way, is the reason Chicago might be invested in is this is one of the players they traded away Jimmy Butler for. This, looking back, I know we've discussed this on the show before, Brian. This was such a god-awful trade for Chicago. So Jimmy Butler is one of the top wings in the NBA. I don't know where he finished. I know he had some injuries last season, so let's do a quick look. So at boxscoregeeks.com, you can go to the Players tab and search. And Jimmy Butler was worth 12.5 wins last season. Really need to search by default. I that puts him right below. This is some fun names. He's right below Kyle Lowry, Damian Lillard, and above Chris Paul. So I mean, amazing company to be in. He was traded away with Justin Patton for Chris Dunn and Lauri Markkanen and no picks. Like this trade is I know we've talked it, Brian, but this trade is baffling. So it's like
Markkanen might have been Markkanen, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. So Lauri Markkanen. It was.
I don't know if it was before or after they took him, but he didn't play in the NBA before he was traded.
Okay. So even so, this is just a ridiculously and I think Lauri Markkanen has looked okay. I'm going to try and see if I'm mistaken there. Lauri Markkanen was not good last season, and that was the only year. So I think Lauri Markkanen, young, there might be upside, but you can't teach height. Just a horrible contract, and it's like you made a mistake, right? Like trading Jimmy Butler was the mistake. You don't need to pretend it was actually a good move. You can just take your licks and move on, which is what they should do, but they didn't. And, they almost got bailed out. This is one of those funny cases where I've seen this happen before in the NBA. I'm trying to think of a good one off the top of my head, but where you might sign a player for too much and another team bails you out. Actually, I got a great one, Brian, that definitely is going to tie in later. Carmelo Anthony. In fact, I'll let that be our next one. With the Denver Nuggets, Carmelo Anthony was this player that was for sure going to get another big contract from the Nuggets. And then lucked out. He didn't want to play for us. And essentially, the New York Knicks moved on him way too soon. So the Denver Nuggets lucked out in the sense that had they done what they wanted to, they would have signed Carmelo Anthony, but were prevented. This is kind of the funny one where the Sacramento Kings almost managed to get, Chicago out of a dumb decision. And this is just a funny point that we've brought up. Like, it really does suck for the NBA that there is inept management in Chicago because of the markets in the NBA. You've got Los Angeles, New York. Actually, in order, Brian, it goes New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Those are the 3 biggest markets. In fact, the NBA could stuff half of their league in those 3 markets. And, basically, I think like 7 teams in New York, like 6 teams in Los Angeles, and then like 3 teams in Chicago.
You're saying just off the size of the media market, right, can support all that?
The combination, and I'd like to actually update this because we did this on old data, a combination of population density and money, right? That ideally for a sports league, that's what you want. You want a bunch of people with money in a concentrated area. So those 3 markets. So it really does suck that the Chicago Bulls, they just are not good anymore. This contract is hilarious. Had some back and forth about it, but just this was not good. If you've got anything else to add on that, I'll let you, and then we'll get to Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those cases where whenever we get people arguing with us that the NBA markets are more properly valued now than they were a few years ago, and people don't pay as much to yay points as they used to. Well, this is another example where I think we're right here that the markets just aren't, picking it up yet. I guess just to state the obvious, his stats aren't very good. He's always been a below average player, and he's at the age now where, it's tougher to see him improve. And here's what I really wanted to to talk about here is kind of like how this went down, right? The reporting on it. And we've found this Chicago Tribune article. And the title of it alone is, and one thing I should say is just about newspapers in general, the author of the column almost never writes the headline, right? Except this headline, fits very well. Why the Bulls had no choice but to match Zach LaVine's offer sheet. That sounds like sunk cost fallacy, just like you were saying, Dre. And a quote from the body of the article: the optics of walking away from LaVine after 1 year would have been awful, but the optics of being the only team to agree with the dysfunctional, treacherously awful Kings comes with its own kind of embarrassment. So this is written by Steve Rosenblum. I'm assuming he lives in Chicago and is connected to the team and knows what's going on, and he's accurate when he says that. It sounds like they're just managing expectations and just trying to not take too much heat, for screwing this up. Like, it's not a winning franchise.
My entrance to get on, we try and go political at least once a show. And what I love about this, the bad optics, if you look in the age of Trump, one thing that is frustrating is there was this belief in politics that dignity of the office mattered, right? You had to behave a certain way, and if you didn't, people would just be mad. And one of the things that is very telling and almost troubling about the Trump presidency is just what happens if the people in power say, who gives a fuck? And what happens if the people that are in theory have the power to do something do nothing? And I find sports is very much this way, where you've got people going, well, if the Bulls do this, their fans are going to be upset. And when we talk my article about parity and stuff in the NBA, it's just key to note that fans are not going to stop watching the Bulls because they're upset with their front office. This has never happened. I mean, if you think about the number of bad NBA front offices, or even just more to the point, like NBA scandals, we're not going to get too much into this. We'll just throw this out as kind of a question to the audience. You noted before the show how kind of weird it was that there was this scandal around the Mavericks in this offseason, and it's just seemed to have gone away. Now, that could be just, for lack of a better word, savvy maneuvering on the Mavericks' part to just kind of bury the story, not engage. And that being said, though, the fans aren't going to stop. And so we've noticed lots of times in the NBA that the Tim Donaghy ref scandal, all of these things that are in theory bad optics, where there might be a breaking point for the fans, but we haven't seen it. And that's the same question for the Trump presidency. Is there a breaking point for a Republican Congress? And the answer seems to be no. So it's very odd where we go, you can't do that as the president. And the president just goes, well, who's going to stop me? So the same point. If the Chicago Bulls don't re-sign Zach LaVine, do we really think a significant portion of season ticket holders are going to stop going, or that a significant number of people in Chicago aren't going to see them? And I mean, one advantage Chicago just has as a team is they're the only basketball or men's basketball in town, which means you can just have, like, when the Warriors come through town, you just want to see, the Warriors play. So you go to that. So it's like they have one of the biggest stadiums and one of the biggest markets. The idea that they need to have the optics, well, we've never seen the fans actually revolt effectively against an NBA franchise. So it's laughable to me to see these takes. And like I said, finished up like with politics, it reminds me so much of the number of like talking head points of like, Democrats shouldn't be mean because don't they realize the optics look bad? And you're like, you've got to realize that you're talking about a fictitious world that doesn't seem to match reality of people caring. So yeah, I find that you're right. The author, who knows who wrote the headline, if it was him or someone else, but that is a hilarious take because that has never been the case. We've seen horrible, like the Clippers for years, like had horrible management who did horrible things. Like, he booed one of their stars, Baron Davis, I recall, when he was there. Nothing freaking happened. So it's like, yeah, when sports writers have the take of, if the owner does this, they'd be embarrassed. It's like, the real take an owner can have is, I already have your tax money. This is already a money-making machine. I don't give a damn what you say. And it would almost be refreshing to see an NBA team do that in the right way, if that makes any sense. We see them do it the other way, right? They don't give a damn that you're like, I'm in Milwaukee, or not Milwaukee, I'm in Wisconsin, but the Milwaukee Bucks, they got the stadium paid for. There was some outrage. And they were like, who gives a damn? And that's the case. Who does give a damn? it would be refreshing to see a team do it the other way, to go, I'm just going to sign good players, and if you want to watch the team, you can watch the team, and if you don't, you can piss off. And honestly, the fans would not.
Yeah, that I don't have too much to add to that, but very tough for Bulls fans. Sorry, guys, this could. I mean, well, so here's the thing. Not only is it a really bad contract, it also says that there's just no chance at all that the front office knows how to evaluate players properly. So there's not much of a future for the Bulls right now. And like you said, it's one of the biggest media markets.
Yeah, and that is depressing. I'll leave the Warriors off for a second. Okay, let's talk Carmelo Anthony. This one's just funny. Vegas is scaring me because Vegas has the odds as him going to Houston as the favorites. And this is baffling to me. You know, we kind of joked about this last week. Daryl Morey won Executive of the Year this last year. We fully think he deserved it. The combination of the Lou Williams trade for Lou Williams and then flipping Lou Williams into Chris Paul, magnificent work. You know, it is something he has been very effective at, and which is Daryl Morey he got Dwight Howard, James Harden, Chris Paul. I think I got the order wrong. I think it's James Harden, Dwight Howard, then Chris Paul. He's gotten all of those players to the team by basically, you know, waiting for them to be unhappy with their franchise and getting them either via a sign and trade or a trade for, you know, I would argue pennies on the dollar, which has been fantastic. You know, we've liked some of his draft picks. Clint Capella is great. This offseason, we're a little troubled, and Carmelo Anthony is one of these big names in free agents, and we're just kind of scratching our head. I threw a little shade at a reporter last week, Andrew Bailey, who, as I said, basically just reads off Basketball Reference to the internet as if it proves a thing. So essentially, if you go to a players tab, I'm on Carmelo Anthony's at Basketball Reference. At the end, they have win shares, BPM, and VORP. Now, what I love/hate about this is VORP is just as noted, just a subtraction of BPM. BPM and VORP are like the same, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. That's a subject for another day. But just reading all of these doesn't mean anything because it kind of proves that you don't know what these statistics mean. And in fact, anybody that uses like per, win shares, BPM in the same sentence, it's like these all have the same ingredients. These are all box score statistics. It is a truly baffling thing to use all of these because what you're essentially saying is math, who knows how the fuck it works. So I always find that amusing. But, you know, Andrew Bailey...
Oh, I can tell you why. I can answer that question. They're just trying to bring in whoever they can. So it's like, here's an alphabet soup. And if you like any of these stats of the above, you may want to read my article. That's what I think it is.
This was an article I never wrote, but I found amusing. So do you recall with Kyrie Irving, the kind of backlash this offseason about him being a flat earther? Or middle of the NBA season this year?
Yeah.
I was actually pretty incredulous about that because obviously he is mistaken about flat earth. That's silly. But first off, you know, in terms of schooling, it is actually a travesty. The if you read like $40 Million Slaves, the book, if you look at this pipeline of getting talented young athletes into the NBA and, you know, just basically they're playing sports as a job from high school on, which is a failing, you know, not just in the sense that the school should be paying them, but in the sense that these institutions are claiming they're providing an education where really they are shortchanging these people on an education and then getting free labor from them. So it's like messed up on both worlds. But what's interesting is when you look at like Kyrie Irving and you go, well, how can he believe this? You go, well, you know, he clearly doesn't have a PhD in astrophysics. And it's really easy to not know stuff and also start getting believe that you understand things that you don't. Because even if you talk to me about the flat earth, like I know some basics of like astronomy, but if you really pushed me, I clearly don't know that much. And in fact, I am decades removed from even being taught that in school. I think the last major science class I took was chemistry in college my sophomore year, which is over a decade ago. So, geez. It's like people get on this very high horse of I know things. And then if you really push them, they don't know that much. So all these people pointing their fingers at Kyrie, it's like, I bet you if I started questioning any of you on astronomy, you would fall apart very quick, despite the fact that you are acting very high and mighty. And then I noticed the same thing with statistics. They think, I know Basketball Reference, so I know statistics. And if you started pushing anybody on any of these statistics, how is win shares calculated? How is BPM calculated? What is VORP? How is per calculated? What are the differences between these metrics? Why would you use two of them instead of just one? They would fall apart very quick. I noticed a lot of people use the sticker argument, right, with the people who've made these metrics, but there is nothing that says when I make a metric that I actually have to tell the truth about what it says. And I find many people, including the creator of BPM, don't understand how the fuck regressions work. And so you're listening to a sticker price of a metric and you don't understand how it works. So to tie that to Kyrie, it's like all of these people will get very high and mighty and say, look at how stupid Kyrie is. He doesn't know astronomy, right? And you can go, but I see you every day quoting statistics I know you don't know how to calculate. And it is a very annoying fact where people think I can search the web and come to a website and that makes me an expert. And that is not the case. But to get back to Andrew Bailey and the alphabet soup, the funny thing about Carmelo Anthony is there is no stat that makes him look good. I hate using the alphabet soup to say why a player is good. But I get baffled when there is not any, there's no out to say why a player is good. Carmelo Anthony last season was below average. This is a troubling one to me. If you are a below average player according to PER, allegedly in PER, 15 is average, but PER is a bullshit metric. Actually, I forgot how to do this right, Brian. Apparently for reporting, you want to do what's known as a truth sandwich. So what happens, when Trump says a lie, what a lot of media outlets will do is they'll repeat the lie kind of verbatim. And that's troubling because you repeat the story. There's a fantastic book called Stumbling on Happiness, which inspired the book title Stumbling on Wins, the second Wages of Wins book. But in it, he talks about how the human brain is messed up where if I tell you something, if I tell you all armadillos are pink, your brain takes that at face value before you really have a chance. This is kind of the blink notion, right? The unconscious brain working without us noticing, and you don't have time to refute it. So the truth sandwich says you say the truth. So in this case, PER is a bad metric that you shouldn't use. Then I say the lie. So in the middle, I would say, allegedly, according to PER, 15 is an average player. Then I refute what the problem is, and I say, well, PER doesn't actually calculate how players contribute to wins in the NBA or even effectively. It's a made-up statistic. But then what I could also finish that with is to say, if your best bet, if a bad metric that you shouldn't use doesn't even help justify why you would sign Carmelo Anthony, why would you sign Carmelo Anthony? And what's just really easy to note about him is Carmelo Anthony's turning 34 next season. And we know this about basketball players. They decline in their 30s. And you kind of, we were talking this, both Chris Paul and LeBron James, it's a gamble. It's a gamble we're willing to take because of how they've looked the last few seasons. But essentially, as soon as a player hits 30, they're a ticking time bomb. Their body is just going to go. It's a funny one where, I don't like ageism in a lot of industries, but there will never be a 50-year-old basketball player that is a productive member of a team with modern medicine. It's possible with future medicine, things will improve and we'll see it, or if they allow cybernetics, possibly. But there's a reason no player makes it in the NBA at age 50, even in their 40s. I think Jason Kidd and John Stockton are the two older players I can think of that were still really good at old age. Melo has been declining the past few seasons and was below average by every conceivable metric you could use, even the bad ones that we say don't use. So it is baffling to me that Melo is a name, and even more baffling that he is showing up as going to Houston. And what's fascinating about Houston, so here were two other free agency moves, Brian, that mattered in Houston. They lost Trevor Ariza and Luke Mbah-a-Moute. Now, both of these players, according to our numbers last season, were above average players. But to the same point, you end up in an interesting fact that both of these players are aging. I believe they're both in their 30s. Does that sound right?
Ariza and Mbah-a-Moute, yes, if not close, but they're a little bit younger than Anthony, though.
Yeah, I'll try and look up. I'm on my laptop instead of my normal thing, so I don't have a good mouse, but I'll try and look that up in just a sec. But yeah, essentially, we were talking this last week about the difference between Chris Paul and Will Barton. So Nuggets picked up Will Barton to a good contract, and we're like, good on you. But if Will Barton walked, our contention is the Nuggets should be able to find similar value to Will Barton, either via savvy trade, someone on the discard pile. That was one of our, how am I dropping his name? Plays for the Spurs, I think. Danny Green, right?
Danny Green on the Spurs, yes.
I believe Danny Green, if I recall, I think was drafted or picked by, I think, the Cavaliers, and they waived him and the Spurs picked him up. In the NBA, you can find productive, mediocre players just on the discard pile via trade. Sign them, right? we always think there are players that are available to you in that medium range, if that makes any sense. The role, what traditional people would call role players. And so Luc Mbah a Moute was 31 years old. Last season, he played under 1,500 minutes, I believe. He played 61 games, only 15 minutes a game. Trevor Ariza is 32, or was 32 last season, and also only played 67 games. So it's like these players are older, maybe a little beat up. I can see letting them walk with the logic that will replace them with commensurate value. And in fact, who was the player? Was it I think it was Chandler Parsons. The Rockets let Chandler Parsons walk. The rumor mill at the time was he shared the same agent as Dwight Howard, and their agent was like, Dwight Howard's not going to sign with you if you force Chandler Parsons to opt into his second round pick contract, I believe. So they let him walk, and then he signed with the Mavericks for a big deal. But they let Chandler Parsons go. Then they picked up Trevor Ariza, and we said Trevor Ariza's as good as, if not better than Chandler Parsons, and cheaper. So when you start getting older players in their 30s that are starting to decline, we have no complaint with letting them go to get better players, provided they're not top 20 players. That's why we'll give you a pass for LeBron and Chris Paul, because even one season of Chris Paul or LeBron James anywhere near their current production value is required to win a title. And if they walk, it's possible you never get that back. But we think that the Rockets can replace Ariza and Luc Mbah a Moute. But what is troubling about this offseason is we're not seeing anything that seems to indicate that that's happening, especially if they bring back Melo. So that's really it. Wherever Melo goes, I tweeted this out. Wherever Melo goes, I'm going to mock that.
Yeah.
I said they're not guaranteed to be the team I mock most this season. I mean, Chicago's in a good spot too with re-signing LaVine. But whatever team signs Melo is in a good spot to get mocked by me. There is no reason any team should take a chance on Melo. Like, we thought it was a bad. Can you imagine, by the way, the Houston Rockets? They won 48 games last season. If they keep Enes Kanter, if Sabonis is Roberson, sorry. Sabonis, by the way, that was just unfortunate. We like that as a draft pick for the Thunder. He didn't look good as a rookie. As we've noted, not all rookies look good, and then looked fantastic on the Pacers. But if Roberson's healthy the whole season and they keep Kanter instead of Carmelo, that team could have been like a 60-win team last season. So with that in mind, it wasn't worth the risk last season for Carmelo, but at least he, in theory, could have been an above-average player. No team should take a risk on him. And if the Houston Rockets do, I honestly do not know what to say.
Yeah, and it's not just that he's below average, it's how far below he is now. I'll be that guy that's, not a mathematician and just throw a stat out there. But it's the one we like, wins produced. He was the worst wins produced player in the NBA last year, and it would not surprise me if he was close to that in previous seasons as well. And it wasn't even close, Dre. You want me to bring this up?
It wasn't when you're saying wasn't even close in previous. Yeah, like this was by far his worst season by all accounts. And I mean, it was the first season he scored below 20 points a game. And what I should stress about that's troubling is I don't think it was for lack of trying. NBA players know that 20 mark is important. We noted that LeBron James went out of his way to score over 10 points in his last game last season just to keep that record. NBA players know that this matters. And Carmelo Anthony, this is what's key. It wasn't that Melo couldn't or didn't score above 20 points last season. It was that he couldn't. And that's troubling because anytime there's a player in the NBA that is capable of scoring above 20 points, they will, that was Donovan Mitchell. I noticed that last season. He was below 20 points per game in the middle of the season when I was mocking him. And I was like, barring something crazy happening, he's going to get above 20 points a game because he knows that's important.
Yeah, so just to illustrate this for the people that are listening only with no video, top 5 negative win producers last year, numbers 3 through 5, pretty expected, right? Dragan Bender, De'Aaron Fox, Dennis Smith Jr., super young players that got way too many minutes. They're probably going to be bad, right?
By the way, breaks our heart. Number 2 was Jay
Crowder. But just to read off some of these numbers, though, these are all the negative 2s, right? Negative 2.4, negative 2.6, and then, like you said, number 2, Jay Crowder, negative 2.9. Hurt a little, bounce around. Maybe he'll, come back. Who knows? But number 1, Carmelo Anthony is negative 4.2 wins produced. That's almost like nullifying James Harden if Anthony plays a bunch of minutes. Like, not quite, but that's like the territory we have to start thinking about how disastrous this would be.
Well, what fascinates me about Carmelo Anthony, and he fit as one of these players, I'll put him up there with like Andrew Wiggins, and this one breaks my heart too, Brian, Frank Kaminsky. So Charlotte Bobcats, right? Right? Hornets? I hate.
Well, Charlotte Hornets is the team there now. I don't know if Kaminsky ended up there. I think so.
Yeah, he's Hornets. Because remember Michael Jordan, like allegedly behind the scenes, Boston offered everything.
I've always been suspicious of that rumor, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. So, but that being said, Frank Kaminsky was a standout player at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You know, this was the team that upset the like best Kentucky team and then couldn't win in the finals. It was very depressing. Love this guy, but he's a horrible player. He should not be a starting player on an NBA team. Just for perspective, he's no Melo, but he's negative 0.2 wins produced. So he's a below average player. The points over par metric, he's basically spotting the opponent 3 points if he plays the full game. But this, Charlotte last season was depressing even with Dwight Howard. And we definitely got to talk Dwight Howard to the Wizards. But, this team really, their issue is none of their players are stars. Even we liked Dwight Howard last season. We thought he was a fantastic player. He's a 10 wins producer. But here's where we always have this kind of funny 1-2 test, Brian. It's the Brian Star test and Dre Star test. So the Dre Star test, you hit 10 wins produced in a season, you're a star. Brian, you tend to go for 200
per minute, yeah.
That's twice as good as an average player. Now, he just missed the Brian Star test, 0.198. But the key about that is, and I think we've kind of knocked this back and forth, is you want 10 wins produced for the regular season because that can make you a 50-plus win team. You need to be above twice as good as an average player to help your team in the playoffs, because when teams shorten their bench and you're playing good competition, you need to be better. So the Hornets last season, they basically have a bunch of good players. Dwight Howard, Kemba Walker, Nicholas Batum, Jeremy Lamb. But none of these players are really stars. Additionally, they had some injury issues. Nicholas Batum missed about 20 games. Jeremy Lamb, for whatever reason, played below 2,000 minutes. Marvin Williams used to be good but seems to be aging. But the really, really rough one for us is Frank Kaminsky. Frank Kaminsky played 1,800 minutes for them, but below average. Like I said, I put him in the same category as Andrew Wiggins, and as you're mentioning now, Carmelo Anthony, where this player on their own, essentially, we're talking the Patrick's rungs of success, knocks the team down a rung on their own because, first off, this team arguably underperformed their record. So the record is 36. We think they won more games than that. I think the wins produced formula is a little high on the thing. But the basic point is they were a better team than they appeared, first off. But second off, if you replace Frank Kaminsky with what we consider I hate the term replacement level player, but you should be able to find an average player to start in your lineup. So if they replace Frank Kaminsky with an average player, this team's like a 45-win team, and that team could, make the playoffs. So that's just the annoying, troubling part about Melo. You said nullifies.
Nullifies the production for sure.
Not quite, but does. I mean, that's the point. Last season, the Thunder were essentially a mid-tier team that got beaten in was it first or second round that they lost to the Utah Jazz?
I want to say second. I thought they won a round, but maybe not.
Yeah,
I can't
okay.
remember.
I'll look in just a second.
Maybe they played each other in the first round, then Jazz lost in the second round to the Rockets. That's what I think happened.
Was it 4-5? It was a rough one, right? Because a 48 team. They were fourth. They were in theory the favorites by record, but according to SRS, they were far below. And additionally, we noted that those SRSs were misleading because the Rockets SRS included half a season of Roberson, and he wasn't there for the postseason.
The Thunder.
Or the Thunders, sorry.
Yeah.
The Thunders included half a season of Roberson, and he wasn't there for the for the postseason. Whereas the Utah Jazz's, that included half a season of Gobert, but he was there for the postseason. So that was the real key. So, but they were a mid-tier team, right? Like a 4 seed. If you replace Melo, they're possibly a top 3 seed. So that's just the point where Melo is. I don't think he negates a star, but he knocks him down a rung. And if they're a mid-tier team, knocking you down a rung knocks you out a round earlier in the playoffs. So that's what we got.
The only upside is if it gives less minutes to Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson, maybe that helps them out because those are two guys. So it seems like Anderson's not going to get any more minutes. But like we said last year, aside from Paul's injury, the heavy Gordon minutes were probably the number one reason why Houston lost in the playoffs. They went way too hard on him.
But the rough part about that is that Melo is worse than Eric Gordon. So it's like, if he's replacing it doesn't help you. We definitely think that, right? Like, we're like, if you can get Eric Gordon off the court, that's a good thing. But if you replace him,
and I hate calling him bad, because of everything he's done over his career, but he's just not productive anymore, is a nicer way to put it. He just doesn't produce.
Well, I noted that about Carmelo Anthony, which is there was a season. So to the exact same point, he was a -4 wins producer this season. The Houston Rockets, Oklahoma City Thunder won 48 games. His best season in New York, which was under, like a D'Antoni squad, he was worth over 8 wins. So if you flip those out, right, that's a 12-win turnaround, right? He could have been that could have been a 60-win team. He's old. And that is so weird. It is always so weird to me when a player finally starts slipping and people are like, same was true with Kobe. And it's just like, clearly this player is not what they once were. And that's what happens. But that doesn't mean you have to keep giving them contracts
I'll speculate what's going on. It could be, we always talk about the banana boat connection. Maybe Chris Paul is like, hey, if you guys are going to sign me and come back, I'll bring in Carmelo Anthony. Trust me, I'll get him, I'll shape him up, I'll get him back to being good again. He's my boy. Let's go. Can you see Morey and the ownership just saying, all right, Chris Paul, you're the man, so we're going to trust you here. That's a reasonable thing that could have happened.
Yeah, and it's funny because we spent all of last week talking about how Chris Paul, despite the fact that he's older, despite the fact that he's got injuries concerns, despite the fact that on paper, using a very rudimentary statistic or formula like Dave Barry did over at Forbes, Chris Paul might be overpaid in his next contract. We said he was probably still worth the money, basically with the note of he gives you a shot at a title. If he brings in Carmelo Anthony, I'm going to change my mind. If like Melo comes to the Rockets because of Chris Paul, to your point about Chris Paul negating Russell Westbrook, no, he didn't. But Chris Paul is negated. His contract is negated if Carmelo Anthony comes.
Well, yeah, just a couple more tweets to share on this before we move on. Anthony Slater, Bay Area beat writer, writes about the Warriors. He says an Ariza and Mbah Moute for Carmelo swap for the Rockets might be more beneficial to the Warriors than the Cousins signing. I think it's more than mine. I think that's 100% true. That's a big minus. And then, of course, Arturo weighed in as well. If you sign Melo to be one of your stars in 2018, I'm crossing you off the list of contenders with a pen. Probably a little too heavy-handed, but I'm just saying it's hard to understate how disastrous it'd be. Now, maybe they're smart enough and they could say, we'll cut the cord if it doesn't go on, but I think it's too risky to go in with that strategy.
You've always noted that where getting a bad team on your roster for any reason, and it didn't end up hurting you too much. It almost did, though, right, Brian? Was Nick Young on the Warriors. Yeah. Basically, Nick Young
almost Nick Young their way to losing to the Rockets.
Exactly. And I mean, Chris Ye on the show talked about how Nick Young might have been signed basically just as the party guy. And like essentially Kevin Durant gave him a discount and they picked up JaVale McGee and were like, we're going to spend $5 million like on a big office party. We're going to get you Nick Young and he's the party guy that's going to keep you all low key next season. Right. That was Chris's justification for Nick Young, that he's just a fun locker room guy that knows how to party. But again, as soon as that guy's on your squad, they risk getting played. They risk taking minutes. They risk taking shots. And so with Melo, it's like I hate the notion of we're going to sign this player, but if it doesn't work out, don't worry, we'll cut the cord. Our big first segment on Zach LaVine was entirely about how this team made a bad decision and then just kept falling for it. So like I said, Morey, we'll see. It hasn't happened yet. If Melo goes to the Rockets, though, I'm going to feel bad. And I will just say that Morey is the San Francisco Giants of NBA GMs, if that's the case. Another weird thing that seems to be going on is Clint Capella might be getting lowballed. The only way this really bites them in the butt long term is if they piss him off. He just agrees to his qualifying offer and leaves in free agency. But I would, that means he's still around next season. I gotta buy at least some team if they're trying to do that, takes a stab and offers him a big contract, and then they're forced to match, a la DeAndre Jordan back in the day for the Warriors. So essentially, the Rockets right now, I'm worried with rumors, but until they're concrete, until Clint Capella isn't signed, until Melo is signed, I'm not going to be worried. But that team, they need to replace Ariza and Mbuti's production, which is about 10 wins, which should not be hard for any decently savvy NBA squad, and allegedly the Houston Rockets are. So we'll have to see what happens there.
Yeah, I thought they should have backed up the Brinks truck for Capella this offseason if they were able to. Obviously, it's not easy to swing him and Paul in the same offseason. But, the more I think about it, it seems like it's not that risky to punt it for one offseason.
Yeah.
There's enough time that he won't be pissed off, down the road.
Yeah. And also what gets funny, like we're going to move to the Spurs next. This one's really weird. And I think Kawhi getting injured 2 seasons ago, I think could effectively be called the end of the Spurs era. When he was injured in the playoffs against the Golden State Warriors, and the Warriors won 4-0. Now, I was tweeting about this today, Brian. I do think it's important. I'm still mad at this idea of the NBA being broken, and we're going to talk that as our last subject, of course, with the Warriors, when essentially the Warriors have had back-to-backs. They've had 3 back-to-back, 4. Sorry, let's try and get this right. They have had 4 back-to-back-to-back-to-back. There we go, Brian. Seasons where injuries to key players against an opponent or themselves arguably shifted the outcome. So if you recall, their first playoffs against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Kyrie Irving got injured in overtime, and that series went to 6. I thought that series wasn't going to be close, and then it almost was. And then, the Cleveland Cavaliers lost Kyrie Irving, and it was still closer than you would expect. You got to wonder what would have happened if Kyrie Irving was there. The next season, Steph Curry slips on some sweat and is not himself. Anybody that thinks Steph Curry was himself for the remainder of that playoffs, like he went like 6 for 19 in the last game of the NBA Finals. Steph Curry got injured. Draymond Green got suspended. Andrew Bogut got injured. Major injuries arguably cost them a title. In the next season, they actually had a losing record in the regular season against the Spurs, and were down against the Spurs until Kawhi Leonard got injured. Then they swept the Spurs because Kawhi missed the remainder of the season. And then last season, of course, Chris Paul gets injured right after the Rockets go up 3-2 with home court. So there have been 4 seasons in a row where key injuries to major players in the playoffs have arguably swung the outcome of the finals. So it really bugs me when people are like, cross off the NBA, it's over next season, right? DeMarcus Cousins, it's over. And you basically have DeMarcus Cousins and Steph Curry, 2 players with major injuries in the past that we have no guarantee are going to be healthy the whole season. And in fact, I think I've been hearing people say DeMarcus Cousins isn't even going to start the NBA season. And don't forget, like Isaiah Thomas is an example, goes out injured with a hip injury, gets signed. We were on board with Isaiah Thomas to the Cavaliers, and he has sucked. Like that, it is amazing that it looks like both Jay Crowder and Isaiah Thomas were injured last season, and injuries can cost productive players. So anyway, Kawhi's injury may very well have been the end of the modern Spurs era. It ended their 50-win streak. They had, I don't know how many. I mean, if you include 1999, which you should, they almost had 2 decades of 50-win seasons, or whatever percentage win seasons those were. And now things have started getting weird, where last season LaMarcus Aldridge wanted out, which we wouldn't have disagreed with, but is bizarre to see a star. Don't forget, back in the day, Tim Duncan decided against leaving for greener pastures in Orlando, I believe, with Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill, to come back to the Spurs. Manu Ginobili has left money on the table to stay with the Spurs. This franchise has not had a problem keeping their stars, but then suddenly LaMarcus Aldridge isn't happy. And then Kawhi, the big drama going on with Kawhi is going on. And then now they're letting Kyle Anderson walk, and Kyle Anderson last season looked amazing. And the thing about it is, it's not like they're letting Kyle Anderson walk for a ton. I believe, are we 100% sure? Like, is that just verified by Spotrac? Let me get it. $37 million over 4 years. As a reminder, the kind of metric, this is going to get a little harder as the cap slowly inches up, but divide the number that you're paying a player by 2, and that's roughly the number of wins you expect. So 37 million divided by 2, that's, I'll round up, right? That's 19 wins over 4 seasons. That's not hard math. 4 wins a season, which, by the way, that's like average. That's an average player. And for perspective, every season that Kyle Anderson has gotten above 1,000 minutes, which is his sophomore season on, 4 wins produced his sophomore season, 5.5 wins produced his junior season. You wanted to call last season his senior season, I guess. 8.1 wins produced. So Kyle Anderson in 3 years easily produced that, and he is arguably entering his prime now.
He's only 24.
Well, this is a fantastic contract. This is the contract you want in a player, right?
Yeah.
You want a player's contract 25 to 28, which is what who did he go to?
I believe he went to Memphis Grizzlies.
That's impressive. We'll see if the Grizzlies always confuse us, so we'll see what happens.
He did actually. It's here on Spotrac. Yep.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm saying I have no idea what's going to happen with the Grizzlies because they started falling apart too. That is a baffling contract to let walk out the door. Why?
And he was a restricted free agent, Dre, so they could have just matched it if they wanted.
Are you fucking kidding me? I've been kissing a lot on this show. That is baffling. And by the way, for what it's worth, he was a productive player before last season without being able to shoot. And then last season, whatever seems to have happened, he seemed to pick up shooting at a 58.2 true shooting efficiency last season. He's got a career average of 33.8%, which is below average 3-point shooting, but he might be able to shoot from 3. So it's like letting this player walk out the door for that. That's a replacement level player's contract. I mean, it's hard, as we've noted, it's been getting really hard for people to wrap their head around modern contracts because we're all used to the $50 to $60 million cap, where $9 million a season might seem like a lot. That's really like $5 million a year. That's like the mid-level exception on the old thing. For the Spurs to let that walk out the door is just baffling. And so their troubles with Kawhi and kind of botching it, right? It is getting hilarious to watch them try and pretend they have any leverage in the offseason with people and asking for the farm with him. So the Spurs are done. It is bizarre to see. I think EJ Fisher, our penultimate Spurs fan, noted like after that playoffs where they beat I think they're like the best SRS in the league and beat the Miami Heat. That was kind of the pinnacle, and like he even said, like there's nothing for a Spurs fan to match that, and it's depressing that not only have they declined, it's going downhill in a hurry, and I don't know where they're going to be because what was funny, we were kind of arguing this with Kawhi, that okay, last season they're like a mid-40s win team, I think like 40, they were the 3rd seed, right, last season?
They were the 7th seed. They played the Warriors in the first round, yeah.
Okay. So I think, actually, it was like they were the 3rd season early in the year and they dropped to the 7th. There's a 40-win team. So like, well, if Kawhi comes back, they could be a contender. Well, here's the problem. Kawhi's not coming back. They just lost their best young player. Their other productive players. Let's take a look at the Spurs. I think it's gonna, it's gonna
not
be
much there.
Well, it's LaMarcus Aldridge, who is not a star and is older and beat up. It's Pau Gasol, who we love, but again older and beat up. So it's like, this team has DeJounte Murray and Danny Green and Patty Mills. It's like it's
those guys are fine when they're not your stars, but you don't have anyone else left.
It's bizarre to think that the Spurs could miss the playoffs next season.
Yeah, and that was kind of my first thought too when I saw that Anderson debacle. I'm using the word debacle a lot on this show. I think is that they might be missing the playoffs, and it's weird because we talk a lot about how we hate tanking and you should try to win instead of tanking. However, if you're going to, lose all your talent but maintain all these bad contracts, Rudy Gay had an okay season last year for him. They brought him back for cheap, but they're bringing back all those kind of guys.
They brought back Marco Bellinelli for 2 seasons for $12 million.
Yeah, so they're not trying to tank, clearly.
They brought back Rudy Gay for a year for $10 million. That's $22 million for Marco Bellinelli and Rudy Gay. Why the hell wouldn't you just spend that money on Kyle Anderson?
I think it's not a philosophy thing. I think it's just a screw up. They just don't think he's good, and that's a mistake.
Which is baffling for the Spurs. I mean, the Spurs have always kind of been good with these underrated, mid-tier players that's been an argument, right? It's hard to get a star, but once you get a star, the way to stay great is to make sure that, players 4 through 10 are really good. And it is baffling that the Spurs, we've seen them let good 4 through 10 players out the door, and they're slowly leaking them out. And then now they don't have a star. So, yeah.
I mean, I'll go after Popovich too. He may be the best coach of all time. You know, it's, I guess, statistically, like him and Phil Jackson, you know, both did a really good job. But he's not, Popovich is not a modern coach. He hates having to shoot a lot of three-pointers. He's complained about that a lot recently. And his teams have shot some, but his reluctance to do it's probably hurt them. Addition to that, he's not a friendly, you know, Steve Kerr kind of guy. Like, he yells at his players and abuses them. So he's still a good coach despite that, but you know, he's not exactly a modern guy.
Well, one thing that I've realized as kind of a mistake in modern mythos in the United States is we love propping one person on a pedestal for success of a great team. This has been like my Michael Jordan problem. Michael Jordan absolutely belongs on the Mount Rushmore of basketball. You know, I think probably, you know, the players I'll put above him that other people might get mad would be like Kareem and Magic, but I've got no complaints with him number 3. I'd probably do Kareem, Magic, LeBron number 1. So LeBron, Kareem, Magic, Michael, I think is perfectly fine as like top 4 ever. But that being said, people basically gave Michael Jordan all of the credit for those Bulls squads, and those Bulls squads had a good GM and a good coach and a lot of luck with health and a lot of fantastic players. So it's like we want one person to give all the credit to when the reality is you really should look at the parts as well. And I think that's a lot of success. A lot of success in the United States is a great combination of people came together in the right circumstances to make something special. And that is a fine story. But the story we love is underdog individual manages to rise above to win, right? The idea of this like asshole genius that manages to overcome everybody that hates him is the story we love, even though when we dig into history of the real world, that doesn't tend to be the case. So with the Spurs, it is really tempting to say Greg Popovich is amazing, but it's entirely possible that there were assistant coaches with Greg Popovich, or one thing I've heard is the synergy with Tim Duncan. I heard that Tim Duncan was okay being yelled at by Greg Popovich, and that meant that Greg Popovich could use Tim Duncan as a method of getting messages across to the players without pissing off the players. Now you don't have Tim Duncan, and he's actually yelling at the players, and players like Aldridge and Kawhi might be like, fuck, I don't need to be treated like this. I'm one of the smartest players in the NBA. I don't want to put up with this.
And Dre, on that Duncan-Popovich thing, just real fast, I think that's an example of one of Duncan's strengths picking up one of Popovich's weaknesses, right? Because let's say it had been another star and Popovich yells at him and that breaks up the team and it never goes anywhere, right? So anyway.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing is whenever, and we've been guilty of this, like with Popovich and maybe R.C. Buford, where we've been like, they're amazing, they're amazing, they're amazing. You go, there are probably other moving parts of that amazing success because that was a 2-decade dynasty. There are other moving parts of that success that either we are not giving enough credit or attention to or don't know about. And I feel that is something that does get important. So when we're looking at the Spurs and going, things are falling apart, it's like it might, even though Popovich is still there might have been other parts that we're just not giving enough credit to. And I think that is important, but it is weird that they, signing Bellinelli, signing Gay, letting Kyle Anderson out the door, horrible mistake. Let's get to some more mistakes and another fun one. I
want to put one big asterisk on that, though. I agree with you. The most likely scenario is they're missing the playoffs and they're done. But I want to see what happens with this Kawhi Leonard trade. They could pull some kind of amazing rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah, I mean,
it looks unlikely, but it's possible.
Movie-wise, we are hitting a point where like you'd need a Deus Ex Machina for me to buy.
We'll that's see. Right.
My point is, fleece the Raptors. See if you can fleece the Raptors. All right, I do gotta admit my normal Schadenfreude about the Milwaukee Bucks. I should like this team. I'm in the state. I think Giannis is amazing. One of the most amazing players in the NBA, one of the most unique talents ever. This offseason doesn't have me optimistic, though, because this offseason, by the way, Spotrac, just hats off to your free agent list. I love it. Okay, so this offseason, 2 funny things they've done. They picked up Brook Lopez to a 1-year deal. Now, admittedly, he's not expensive, but this is the key we keep talking about, which is there's an opportunity cost. So, as a point, they currently have one of the greatest players in NBA history, at least looking at the numbers. Giannis is fantastic and is a completely unique talent. But you basically get 9 years of that guy. And who knows if he even holds up past then. And so they're essentially wasting a season by not getting good talent around him. And Brook Lopez is just not a good talent. Last season, he shot 55.7% true shooting for a center, which is horrendous. He is not a good player. He's a below average player. When he was younger and not so beat up, we thought he had upside. That's the key. But he has never really lived up to it. Additionally, they picked up Ersan İlyasova, who has not been good in years, for a 3-year, $21 million contract. So essentially, so far all the Milwaukee Bucks have done is add 2 below-average players to a mid-40s win team with one of the best players in the NBA. I call it my schadenfreude because when this team does poorly, I relish in it to a degree. As mentioned, I'm a petty person. An analytics person for the squad said they never listen to the wins produced people. And I was like, you know what? Fine. I'm like, so when this team makes bad statistical moves, that being said, I also believe even the subpar analysts out there, and I'm not saying the people on the Bucks are, but I'm saying when I look at people on the internet that I think are below average NBA analysts, and by the way, this does sadden me, Brian, compared to baseball, we suck. Basketball, mainstream analytics are just so crappy compared to baseball, and I still don't think baseball's great. So it really does make me sad when I'm just like, we are nowhere close to the Moneyball revolution for mainstream consumption. The irony is, I think there are some teams that are using better numbers in the NBA that are effectively more productive than baseball. Because in baseball, even if you're a smart, savvy analytics squad, luck can squash you. In the NBA, that's not as true. But the mainstream, it just didn't catch on as much. And, we're still like the Kobe assist, right? We're still arguing if a missed shot is valuable. So that being said, even the worst analysts that could potentially go to an NBA squad, I don't think they would sign off on moves like these. So who knows if it's just the owner saying, we need an established veteran, instead of them going, hey, we could maybe make a run for Clint Capella. So.
Yeah, and the problem with the İlyasova deal is the contract length, like you said, 3 years. He's in his 30s. I'd pay him $7 million for 1 year maybe, because who knows? He used to be good. Maybe we can turn back the clock with 3 years or even 2.
One of my favorite lists, Will Koo, I think it was Exploring NBA. I'll try and see. His Twitter hasn't been active in years, which makes me sad. Who did a great piece on NBA career links, had some great insight on types of contracts you should go for. And essentially, you should not sign a multi-year veteran deal unless it's a really, really good player. Ersan İlyasova has been below average for years now. So
yeah, that's right.
Here's just another funny one, Brian. I have not done enough research into this, but I can just say from observation, there's got to be something about Dwight Howard's personality that just pisses people off. I am baffled by the reception to Dwight Howard. He was a good player last season. As mentioned, that team, if you take Kaminsky off that squad, is at least a playoff squad. He was picked up by the Washington Wizards. I forget if it's a waivers situation or what, but it looks like he's on. Wow, that is such a steal. That actually makes me sad. 2 years for $5 million a year to the Washington Wizards. I mean, that probably makes them a top 4 seed, right? I think they were a mid-40s team last year and flamed out in the first round of the playoffs. It's a good move, but there just has to be something about Dwight Howard, because the number of teams that he has burned through, there is just something about him. And I mean, he is not the first NBA player that has an attitude problem. So that's all I'll say is it is remarkable to see the disdain for Dwight Howard, despite the fact that he had one of the greatest primes. He was a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year back-to-back-to-back, had some amazing wins-produced seasons, took an Orlando squad to the finals that had no business being in the finals. And now that he's declining, just people hate him. And it amuses me when you've got people like him that are still productive, still have some life in them, that are just getting bounced around, and you still have people asking if Melo can come to their squad when, he is way past his expiration date.
Well, yeah, here's a story that's bouncing around in the local media here. Again, take it for what it's worth. But so the DeMarcus Cousins to the Warriors kind of dropped right in the middle of when we were taping last week, and we just kind of shrugged. We're like, oh, we haven't had time to look at it yet. But something that came out after was that Howard and his people were talking to the Warriors about going there, and they're the kind of organization where they talk to all the players about it. And it was reported that every single one of the Warriors stars said, no way, we refuse to play with Howard. However, Cousins then a little bit later called up Bob Myers, the Warriors GM himself, and is like, hey, what about me? Then Bob Myers comes around and goes to all the Warriors All-Star players. Every single one of them to a man said, yes, we love Cousins. We want to play with Cousins. So apparently, yeah, compared to Cousins anyway, he's not very well liked.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying there is obviously something about him that people in the NBA just hate. And I mean, I think one thing we've noted before that we're going to move into Kevin Draper. So I'll just make this observation that Kevin Draper has before, which is a lot of NBA reporters essentially trade in free propaganda for teams and agents in exchange for scoops, and those scoops are kind of bullshit. I'm blocked by Adrian Wojnarowski, and I'm fairly certain it's for a series of interviews I did with Kevin Draper about Adrian Wojnarowski. Because Kevin Draper has done some fantastic reporting about like the Adrian Wojnarowski, like how wrong he was about the LeBron James saga back in the day.
He wrote a long form piece on Wojnarowski when he was at Deadspin, right? That's when you interviewed Kevin Draper.
Yeah, and then he's also written follow-up pieces since then about how Wojnarowski just, was anti-ESPN, and just when he was purchased by ESPN, essentially, how certain people were ousted immediately. That's one of the rumors he put up there, which was one of the reasons one of our favorite writers ever, Ethan Strauss, it's The Athletic, right?
I think he got picked up by The Athletic, yeah, but he's been writing a lot of good stuff lately that I've not been reading, but supposedly, yeah.
Ethan Strauss, one of our favorites ever, was ousted from ESPN, and one of the rumors was that essentially he wrote an anti-Wojnarowski piece back in the day, and Wojnarowski was a grudge. So but the point being, these reporters, they essentially will spread stories for teams in exchange for access. And so, Wojnarowski might release something that says, multiple teams are interested in Andrew Bogut. And what he's really doing is saying, as a favor to you, agent of Andrew Bogut, I will say that story so that you have leverage now. And then in return, you, agent, will tell me where a player signs early. So 10 minutes before Andrew Bogut's picked up, he can tweet it out, and everybody's like, oh, my God, Wojnarowski is amazing. Again, this is Draper again, but the whole point of Adrian Wojnarowski just live tweeting the draft and releasing the picks early, it's such bullshit that people give that any credit because he's just breaking the rules. The teams and reporters have to wait to say it. And he's just like, well, I know what it is. I'll just say it early. And to give that any kind of credit as like important reporting is ridiculous. And so Kevin Draper is very anti-scoop reporting, which I love. But the thing that he tweeted out, and we've just been huge fans, is Michele Roberts. Michele Roberts just kind of came out swinging against this whole notion that competitive balance in the NBA is the players' fault because they didn't agree to playoffs to salary smoothing. So to explain, the NBA had an influx of capital when they signed their new television contract for about over $2 billion. And the way the NBA works is the way you pay your players is a salary cap. Salary cap is tied to basketball-related income. Basketball-related income includes things like television contracts. So when that got boosted, what they could have done is said, okay, Klay Thompson, you're making $16 million a year. That was under the old salary cap of $60 million. The new salary cap's $100 million. What we're going to do is we're going to, whatever math, I always screw up math on the show, Brian, but we're going to take $16 million to $20 million. They didn't do that, and as a result, some teams, the Warriors included, got more money, and essentially the Warriors used that as a method of getting Kevin Durant. Now, what's amusing to me about that being viewed as a problem is there have been two times in NBA history. With Shaquille O'Neal, there was a brief window in time where teams were not allowed to match a rookie player leaving. Essentially, there was a restricted free agency that's existed throughout most of the NBA. And so what would happen now, we're talking this about Capella. If Capella says, screw you guys, I don't want to play for you. And let's say hypothetically, let's see, who's a good team? Let's say the Denver Nuggets swoop in and offer Clint Capella a max contract. They don't have the money to, but let's say they do. Right now, the Rockets could match that, and Clint Capella comes back to the Rockets. There was an offseason with Shaquille O'Neal where that happened, where the Orlando Magic, they weren't quick enough in getting his rights. The Lakers offered him a max contract. Orlando tried to match it. Shaq didn't have to agree to their match and left. That was a good thing for the NBA. Shaquille O'Neal went to the Los Angeles Lakers. As we were noting on the start of the show, that is the second best market behind New York to put a star in. Shaquille O'Neal in Los Angeles was a great thing for the NBA, but there was a loophole. The exact same thing happened with Kevin Durant here about parity, where essentially he went to the Warriors. But again, Kevin Durant going from the Oklahoma City Thunder, which is a horrible market, to the Golden State Warriors, which is a pretty decent market. It's not as big, but it's also very affluent. That is a much better thing for the NBA. So first off, it's baffling for the players to get blamed, but essentially Michele Roberts has come out and said it's bullshit to blame the players for not agreeing to salary smoothing. And she kind of went off on some things. And we've just said this before. We love Michele Roberts. She's awesome.
Yeah, so I wonder if there's anything more you can say about just kind of like the basics of cap smoothing, because I don't fully get it. Is the idea basically they would have spread out the size of the salary cap over several years instead of putting it all in at once like they did last year? Basically, is that pretty much it?
It says if you look at the Warriors had agreed to like $60 million in cap to their players. Now, some of those, the way the NBA does work, for max contracts, that is percentage-based. But the reason the Warriors were in a great situation is several of their players, I know for 100% for sure, Klay Thompson and Steph Curry did not agree to max contracts. So they weren't percentage-based.
Yeah, Draymond Green didn't either.
Oh, so those three. So that's the key. So salary smoothing would have done the following. It would have said, okay, Draymond Green, you're getting $20 million a year or whatever. I'm making these numbers up. You're going to now make $25 million. Klay, you're getting $16 million. You're going to get $20 million.
He would adjust up existing contracts.
Yeah, that's what could have happened.
Interesting.
But instead they said, no, we're just going to leave the contracts alone. So the only players that benefited were people on max contracts. And then that meant certain teams, like the Warriors, had basically an excess of open space to spend, which they were able to do on Kevin Durant. Now, it is worth noting with Kevin Durant, he still took a pay cut. He still left the same amount of money on the table from OKC. And as we've noted, it is baffling that anybody sides with OKC. Everybody was pissed. Like, we actually sided with this. When the Seattle Supersonics were stolen, I put that in quotes, from Seattle to go to OKC, everybody was mad at this. Now, our argument was the reason they left Seattle was the city refused to pay money to upgrade the stadium. Additionally, they got money from OKC and the NBA because they didn't get a team in there fast enough. So essentially, a city, instead of subsidizing an NBA team, got money from the NBA. We consider that a win. But everybody was mad about this. And then suddenly when Kevin Durant left, everybody was on the side of OKC. I was like, how on earth are you? That person, Clay Bennett, was the villain in one of the biggest sports movies, Major League. So it's baffling to me that people are on that side. But so I really like that Michele Roberts was coming out against it. Now, I'm going to tie this to my piece, which is essentially the NBA's problem with parity, which everybody is they're trying to blame it on Kevin Durant and the Warriors and saying that the Warriors screwed it up. And as noted, it's bizarre to me that people leave out the fact that the Warriors 2 off seasons in a row had an MVP caliber player on an opponent get injured, which is why they won as easily as they did. Now, what's also worth noting, my article, I brought up 2 metrics. One is called the Null Scully, and the other was just how long do the playoffs go? And the NBA actually got more fair after Kevin Durant made his move. And the playoffs arguably got a little less fair the first season and a little more fair last year. The real issue the NBA has, and I got some love from Mark Cuban today, so I love this, is the East versus the West. The West has been significantly better than the East for years now. Now, last season, for the first time in like a decade, the East actually had more teams in the top 20% in terms of wins than the West. Now, the problem is, first off, the Boston Celtics were a mirage, right, because they lost Kyrie Irving at the end of the season. Toronto Raptors, who knows what happens with them? They just flaked out. And obviously, the Rockets and Warriors were head and shoulders above everybody else. So that's the only reason there. But, I mean, the NBA's parity issue and the Warriors' dominance has less to do with the NBA being unfair, which it is, but it's always been unfair. That's the key. The NBA has always been unfair, and arguably it is the most fair it's been in about a decade now, even with Kevin Durant's move. The real problem is their playoff seeding structure is stupid. As I noted last season, what would have happened if you'd done a 1-2-16 seeding is the Warriors would have played the Cleveland Cavaliers in the second round instead of the finals. And the finals would have probably been the Houston Rockets versus the Golden State Warriors. And remember that went to 7 games. So it's like the NBA's issue is that their playoff system is stupid. And it is bizarre to see people blame it on the players. And I might have an article coming up about how there are many other people to blame for the NBA's parity problems. And the biggest ones I'd say are the owners. The owners make dumb decisions. We're sitting here talking about how stupid the Chicago Bulls front office is.
Yep. And the Kings, they're not innocent here. They just got lucky.
Well, what I'll say is I don't give a damn about the Kings because they're not. The Kings are an example.
That's our state capital, Dre. How dare you say that?
That is true, right? Yeah. But the Kings are in a horrible market that we think has no business having an NBA team. Milwaukee's in the same boat. But, I want a good team. There's no mistake in the fact that when the NBA was its most popular, 80s and 90s, it's when they had good teams in Los Angeles, Boston, and Chicago. That's huge. That's where you want. And actually New York, too. Don't forget that with Patrick Ewing and even Marcus Camby, they were making final. They made it to the finals before what was it? Was it Starks that shot him out of the last game of the finals? That's rough. But
I saw John Starks miss a lot of shots over the years. It's very possible.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, the NBA is at its best when you have good teams and great markets, and so I'm on Michele Roberts' side that it is foolish to get mad at the players for the lack of parity in the NBA. An easy fix is to fix playoff seeding. Just make it better, make it smarter than you are NBA. And, there are other things you could do. You could get rid of the NBA draft. I will say we discussed this a little last week, but with DeMarcus Cousins, I do find it baffling how sure people are. Because, for instance, one of the best players on the Warriors last season was Andre Iguodala. Now, by best, it's funny where I'd probably place him 4th behind Durant, Curry, Draymond. But still, on a 60-win team, that's key. He's no spring chicken. Sean Livingston actually had life, but he's getting older. As you noted, this team lost JaVale McGee. This team, I would argue, if you think DeMarcus Cousins is the player he was last season, they kind of stayed in place. If you logically believe that Andre Iguodala might be getting worse and aren't 100% on board with the idea that Steph Curry is going to be 100%. So it is weird to me that people think that this is just a coup when this team might win 55 wins next season. And I think they might just look out to the fact that Houston is losing its damn mind and the Spurs are in disarray.
Yeah. So as far as the Warriors, I agree on Cousins. I've been tweeting to you guys that I think McGee will probably have a better season for the Lakers than Cousins will for us. The fact that Cousins is probably going to miss half the season is a big part of it. But yeah, I mean, here's another player that I wanted for the Warriors, Kyle O'Quinn, great defensive and offensive player for the Knicks. He went, I want to say, to the Pacers for less than the mid-level exception, something like $4.5 million. So I would rather add him than DeMarcus Cousins on the Warriors. But
Doug McDermott, I'll look that up. Wow, really? Actually, so check this out. Indiana picked up Tyreke Evans.
Indiana's looking good.
I'm going to look up Doug McDermott real quick. But that Tyreke Evans, I mean, one of the advantages with him is, he doesn't have to play the whole season. They have some other good players there. Doug McDermott is replacement level. I'm a bit confused at his deal, but again, it's not horrible.
We need the WTF engine for this, Dre. That'd be how we settle this.
Right. So yeah. Anyway, I mean, yeah, Indiana looks good next season. That could be good. My sleeper next season is OKC. I think OKC can make the finals next season.
Just that Robertson has got to be healthy. That's the big thing.
Roberson healthy. Paul George.
I still think it's Robertson. Okay, let's go to Basketball Reference and settle this, Dre. Okay, right now. Okay, we're typing again.
Dang it, you're right. It is Roberson. You are 100% right. All right. Okay, so anyway, with that being said, I'm trying to think about anything else. I'll maybe get a post up on this. If you look for it, the Great Lakes Analytics Sports Conference, the talks are up. My talk, where I talk about free throw shooting, is up. One thing I'll try and include is I'll actually try to at some point put my slides up as well, just because those are not my talk is recorded, but it's not lined up. So I'll see if I can maybe host those. But if you want to look for those, there were some good talks. I'll try and maybe do a post. So expect a post or a link about that at some point in the near future. I don't have much else, Brian. I think that was everything I had. I do have a shout out to give, but I need to find it. So I'll let you finish up on any points you have on free agency, parity, etc. And that'll be it.
I did watch your talk on free throws. It was great. Very like workmanlike, and that's what we like to see. Like where it's the impactful stuff, it's the boring stuff. So very, very good talk. Last thing I had on free agency was, I think, kind of the last big signing was Nurkic re-signed with Portland, and I'm not a big fan of this deal. What made me think of it is when you said a non-star you'd never want to sign to a long-term deal. Well, 4 years for him, where he's never really been good other than that short stretch when he first came to Portland. He wasn't great on the Nuggets. He wasn't great on Portland after that stretch at the beginning. I think this is a pretty poor deal for Portland.
Yeah, I mean, it was amusing to me when people were saying it was a big deal that the Nuggets lost him.
Sorry, I should say the numbers too. 4 years, $48 million, $12 million a year, $12 million cap hit next year. Too much for him.
Okay, let's actually just verify this, because I think I might disagree with you marginally. Yeah, you're right. He has never had a sustain. He has had his best season was last season, where he only played 2,000 minutes at average pace, about 4.6 wins. So I remember back in the day I was talking about like Jeremy Lin, when people were asking if he was overpaid at $8 million a year when they did the poison pill contract, and I was like, probably, but it's not going to kill you. The same is true for Portland. I mean, Portland's major problem, right, is what's CJ McCollum and I think Wesley Matthews.
Matthews is, I think, still on Dallas. They haven't been able to get rid of him after that Achilles.
What was it? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was Dallas that overpaid for him.
Which, by the way, is DeMarcus Cousins' injury. We looked into those Achilles after that, and that's a brutal injury. Very few players have been able to be good coming back from that. Kobe Bryant had it. He wasn't great later in his career, but yeah.
Well, wasn't that like the end of it? I seem to recall. I could be wrong.
Oh, he might have had 2 Achilles. Yeah, anyway.
I will say the major mistake for Evan Turner, that was who. Sorry. So Evan Turner that picked up from Boston. CJ McCollum and Evan Turner are making $40 million. That's 40% of their cap. That's Mo Harkless is making 10. I mean, I don't love this move. It's not a good one. He's probably marginally overpaid, but it's not the move that's sinking them.
They didn't want to pay Ed Davis $4 million to keep. I'd rather have Ed Davis and Nurkic at the same salary. So
number of players that teams just let walk out the door, and I mean it is baffling. Like
they value different stuff, right?
Yep. And what's annoying is we point that scoring is one of the most valued things. What's amusing is there's only one ball, so if you're valuing scoring and you have too many scores, there is just by default diminishing returns. Whereas if you go for the scrappy players like Ed Davis, it is easy for them to fit in, because it's funny we're saying this. Not needing the ball when you have a team that has like CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard is a skill, because that means CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard can get all their shots.
Or Robertson on Oklahoma City, great example of that. He can be great without shooting a lot.
Apologies, Robertson. I've been saying it wrong. It is not Roberson. Brian is right. All right, so here's my shout out. It is to I'm probably going to slaughter this, but I'm going to try Devereux Peters, who played at University of Notre Dame and now plays for the Washington Mystics, a professional basketball player. She had a fantastic thread about why, as a female basketball player, she does not accept random one-on-one challenges with men that, for whatever, think they are better than top female athletes. She doesn't basically put up with that. And Dave Barry has noted this. Actually, I feel bad I didn't shout this out either. Dave Barry had a great post a while back about how the best basketball players are in the WNBA if we essentially kind of view it as a weight class, which if we think boxing, UFC, arguably WWE, which isn't a real sport, this idea of having different weight classes in a sport is nothing new. And boxing and UFC are two of the most popular sports. The idea that some of the best basketball players, if we're doing like pound for pound, can be in the WNBA is, first off, there's nothing new or novel about it. It's as old as sport itself. And then what's more, anybody who's good enough to play in the WNBA They might not be able to compete with NBA players, but the NBA players is like the top 400 basketball players in the world. They could still kick the crap out of most people, if not like 99.9% of just anybody. They would win. So this weird idea of, WNBA players not being good enough to just take off random comers off the street. That was like the Brian Scalabrine challenge I loved back in the day. Brian Scalabrine was like the 10th man for the Boston Celtics. He had like a radio challenge where people could just challenge him to a game of one-on-one, and like only one person scored a point on him, and they were like a college walk-on.
Yeah.
So it's like to even score on an NBA bench player, you have to be a really good athlete. To think that you could compete with a WNBA player unless you were, again, at bare minimum, a college level athlete is absurd. She had a great post on her thoughts on that, about like random people challenging her and why it's BS and why she has nothing to gain from answering random people's challenge. She's already a professional basketball player, which is 100% the right take. Sadly, as with many things, the comment responses to that were about as good as you would expect. But the original take was very good. So that's my shout out. All right, that's like, normally you and I have a pretty good synergy going where I do the pregnant pause, Brian, and we pass the ball. That clearly.
No, my comment before was my only shout out.
Okay, so we are done. That has been our show. If you want to snap through the site, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We've been writing regular content there now, so that's good. You can find the show on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, it helps us out. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. Usually we'll find a regular time slot, Brian, but it has normally been 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. If you missed the live show, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I have been your host, Dre Alvarez, Nerd Numbers everywhere else. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. That's been our show. Hope your team gets the free agent they want, and if they don't, order a cookie.